So, I mean, you touched on a really good point, which I think is really quite a point of contention, even within the recreational fishing community. And that is that some fishers' experiences are not aligning with what they're seeing in the, scientific publications and the media, et cetera, et cetera. So, a lot of fishers are reporting greater and greater levels of shark-based depredation. It's why our app got off the ground. But just recently there were a couple of Nature papers that talked about how even in Australia, the shark populations are not where they should be, or at least they estimated them to be much lower than they used to be, and globally more so. But how do our listeners make sense of that? Where do you think the truth lies as a shark biologist?
Yeah, so I suppose first we'll talk about the science of it and where sharks are at. So globally, again, they're the most threatened form of marine life. 37% of them threatened with extinction. And we go, okay, cool, that's globally, but what's the relevance to Australia? Australia, we're fortunate enough to be in a relatively good position, but we do have some problems in our backyard. So we can look at species like tiger sharks and bull sharks, where there's a suspected decline on the east coast, but in other portions of Australia, they might be doing all right. But you'll notice I use the word suspected. So there's still some uncertainty. You look at hammerheads, for example, or scalloped hammerheads, by recent scientific assessments, they're endangered. They're in decline. There's no real questioning that at the moment. But then you look at species like the Galapagos shark, which is quite common around Lord Howe. And there's been some recent studies out in Lord Howe looking at shark depredation. And the Galapagos shark, it's in relatively healthy numbers, but the population trends are unknown. So we don't know whether they're stable, declining, what's going on. And then you look at grey reef sharks, they've declined by that, or the trend is nearly 30% in the past 45 years. And they've been implicated in some depredation events. And then you look at black tip reef sharks up in the north, and since Taiwanese fishing ceased in, I think, the early or late 80s from memory, black tip reef shark populations have improved. And, they're bordering on possibly, at the 80% mark. But we also have to acknowledge that we're coming off quite a low baseline. Like, we're not at where they're originally at. And so what I'm trying to say is that the science is doing the best it can. And you really have to ask yourself, well, what species are we talking about? Not all sharks are the same. They don't live all in the same areas. They don't, have the same size. They don't necessarily all breed the same way. So it's important to understand what species we're questioning and what numbers there are. Some sharks, we have better numbers because, they're commercially valuable, so the data's there. Some species that aren't really commercially valuable, aren't really frequented much, the data's a bit more sporadic. So the point is that when we look at, say, Queensland fisheries management on the East Coast, or the Territory, or anywhere really, but particularly Queensland, one thing we're asking for, and it's good to see the progression heading towards that, is, okay, we really need to get a handle on shark numbers of specific species and get good stock assessments and their distribution. So from a commercial perspective, we can manage and tailor the management better. And from a rec perspective, you'll at least have some clarity about what's going on and where it's going. So that's sort of where the science sits at the moment. And from the conservation side of things, what we're asking for is very much what rec fishers are asking for: what sharks, where, and how many. When we look at different experiences and them not matching up with what we're seeing, what we're understanding from studies out in WA, and also, as I touched on, from Lord Howe Island, what we're noticing is that where rec fishing is quite concentrated and there's popular hotspots, depredation rates are more likely to occur there. And the current thinking is that sharks are learning where to get an easy feed. So there might be more sharks in a given area moving in there, but not necessarily as a population. And the analogy I like to give is that if I was walking down the street with pizza, and on the first day I yelled out, free pizza, free pizza, free pizza, say an hour, I might get some people coming up to me and taking a few slices. If I do that every day for like a week or 2 weeks, word's going to get out and people are going to go, dude, at 12 o'clock, there's free pizza here, come get some. All of a sudden, I've got all these people wanting free pizza. I can't then say, because more people are getting pizza from me, the Australian population is booming. I can say more people are around me, sure. So that's one aspect. Recently, I was talking to a wreck fisher up in the Gulf, Carpentaria, and he's been up there for 30 plus years. So knows the landscape really well, both physically and metaphorically speaking, and also the fishing activity that's been going on. And his observations are, look, shark depredation is really bothering us. He goes, but what we've noticed is that we don't see long-tailed tuna as often. We don't see massive schools of bait fish as often anymore. And he said, we've been fishing here for ages and we'd fish in and amongst bait balls and everything like that, and the sharks would never bother us. They were quite happy getting their fill of bait fish and whatever else. He goes, but from what we've noticed over the years, from unsustainable fishing practices, we don't see as many bait fish. Some of the schools aren't as here as often or as large as what they are. And all of a sudden, we're getting picked off by sharks. And he goes, it wouldn't put it past me to go, well, sharks are simply going to go for what's easier for them. In the past, he said, they can get their fill quite easily. Why would they bother a wreck fisher? Like, it's not worth wasting all that energy to take one fish off a hook. Whereas with the ecosystem changing because of fishing pressures, possibly elements of climate change, sharks are then going, well, I've got to get my feed and I don't want to work too hard for it. So wreck fishers are giving off quite literally the signals, blood in the water, stressed out fish, so on and so forth. So yeah, it's very complex. It's very complex, and I don't discount anyone's experience. I think it requires a bit more of an involved conversation to understand why those experiences are happening and how that relates to shark numbers. But as we touched on, generally speaking, with sharks, quite a few species are in decline. We're coming off low baselines. And what we consider normal today won't be normal in 10, 20 years, or what was normal 15 years ago is different to today. So the baseline's always shifting in terms of experience. So yeah, it's going to be a bit of a journey, to be a bit cliche, but I think, the fact that we're having this podcast, I know this year there's every intention to have a national round table of sorts to get key representatives literally at the table and go, okay, what strategy can we come up with? How can we start addressing this? It's good to see those things happen as well. Because yeah, the problem is real. We've just got to make sure that when we address it, we do so with the best knowledge that we have.